Good morning, YouTube. I hope you all are doing well. I'm here and back with another story. Just some more stuff concerning my family, and it's a cautionary tale. This happened some years ago, and they were not my aunt and uncle, they were my actual great aunt and uncle. So they were my mom's aunt and uncle. My uncle is still alive, but my auntie had passed away, and actually they were no longer together when she passed away. So kind of a long story there, but I'm only telling this aspect of what happened or what I observed from childhood. And so let's begin. So this happened when I was really young, and my great aunt, now this one was my great great aunt, okay? So this was my great aunt and uncle's auntie, their auntie, which was my grandmother's sister. So this particular auntie, from what I heard through the family and stuff, was really mainly my parents talking, and this was like my mom and stepdad talking, okay? She, had a lot of money, and I think my grandmother even told me that this woman had a jug joint in the South at one time. I think the jug joint was in Chattanooga, Tennessee, or something like that. And that she had a lot of stashed away, I guess, from those days. I guess she sold the jug joint. I don't know how she got the money, but just that she had a lot of money. So this particular aunt had gotten sick. Like I said, my great great aunt. And she got sick from cancer. Now, by this point in her life, she became a church woman and was going to church. And I did see some changes in this particular aunt. And so, I believe she's in a better place now. But anyway, she got sick and she was dying from cancer, right? And so this particular aunt and uncle, the one this story is about, decided to take her in and take care of her. Now, this particular aunt and uncle wasn't really particularly close to my part of the family, but during that time, they seemed to pretty much like connect. They connected with my grandmother, and my grandmother went over there and took turns taking care of, this auntie who was sick from cancer, right? So fast forward, my aunt finally passes away. And I remember we were all riding in a limousine. I would say all of us, but like it was me, my parents, my grandmother, one of my other uncles, and one other family member. So it wasn't this aunt and uncle that I'm talking about. They had already, I guess they had their own ride there or whatever, but we rode in a limousine to the funeral. So I remember after the funeral, as we were riding back, my parents were complaining. They were actually rather upset. And so basically the story that I got from the adults, just overhearing them talk and stuff like that. And let me just put a little footnote here. I'm not saying that it's appropriate to let your kids be in your business and stuff like that. I think there should be some limits. But see, I have chosen with my own children, I don't keep them out of everything. Certain things I tell them so I can teach them a lesson about it. Now, if I'm talking to another adult, I don't really let them be in my face like that, but I'll come back and talk to them about, some of the stuff that's going on with the adults. And the reason why I find value in that is because, like the story I'm telling now, my parents were so upset they were actually talking in front of me. And I'm glad I got to hear what they were saying, because now as an adult, I was able to put my own thoughts to it and learned a lesson from it. But I digress. So on the way back, they were complaining, and they were saying how my aunt and uncle that was taking care of her had threw him in a box, or threw her in a box, and the casket was cheap, and they just was like, well, where did all the money go, and so on and so forth, right? They were upset, particularly my mom. My grandmother seemed to be just real quiet, and the mood in the car just wasn't too great. You know, they were upset, and they had every right to be if everything they were saying was accurate. And looking back on it now, I realize, yeah, I believe it was very accurate. So basically, it was like, well, where did the money go? Where did all her money go? And I think they had expected this particular great aunt to leave some money to my grandmother, because this was my grandmother's direct auntie. Okay, this was my grandmother's brother and sister, or brother and sister-in-law, that took care of this great great aunt of mine. Okay, so yeah, they were upset. So just some years later, another tragedy happened in our family. Okay, now my aunt and uncle, or great aunt and uncle, that took care of this particular great great auntie of mine, they had a son. Okay, and their son was their oldest. And I even remember this particular cousin of mine being at the funeral and stuff like that. I remember, you know, I'm younger than him. Well, was younger than him. And so what happened is, some years later, my cousin had gotten into some trouble. He wasn't a bad kid. He wasn't out there like that, but trouble found him. Okay. And years later, that trouble found him again. Like, he was able to escape it, but then the trouble found him again some years later. And I'm telling you, this had to be, oh, I don't know, not that long after my great aunt had died. And remember, this cousin, his parents were the one who took care of her, right? And apparently took this auntie's money. Now, I'm just telling you, this is the talk that was in my family. Well, let me tell you what happened. Their son, their oldest son, he ended up getting shot and killed. And I mean, it was like a shock to the family. Like, how did this happen? So on and so forth, right? I began to notice something. Now, at this point, I was a teenager, and their son was a little bit older than me at this point. You know, he was always a little older than me. And I think he was like in the 12th grade when this happened. And I noticed, now this is something I noticed on my own, okay? This is not family talk. This is stuff I started to see for myself, because at this point I'm a teenager and I'm able to pretty much think for myself at this point. I mean, the casket they had that boy in was tight. It was a nice blue casket. It was like a blue silver. It was gorgeous, and you could tell that bad boy wasn't cheap. And then not only that, they gave this boy 2 funerals. They flew his body out to another city where he had, I guess he had his mom's side of the family at. And he had a funeral out there. When I tell you they spent so much money on this boy's funeral and his burial arrangements, apparently, honey, they spared no expense on this send-off for their son. So fast forward to some years after that. And as a side note, and this is a story that's going to come up later, there was another cousin of mine, a female cousin of mine, that wasn't even speaking to me at the time of this funeral. Like, we didn't even speak. And I didn't even realize what was going on with her at that point. I'll bring this up later on another video. Just wanted to add that as a side note. But fast forward some years later, I began to think about the whole scenario with my aunt and uncle, their son dying, and how they were the same ones that took care of my great great aunt. And oh my goodness, it was like it dawned on me. I was like, I wonder if all that money they took from our auntie, because I remember my parents were suggesting that when she was in this, I guess I don't know if I could find the best words for it, but like disillusioned state, like not clear-minded, they believed they had her sign some documents that left all her money to them, right? So I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if all the money they took from her, they ended up spending on their son's, my cousin's, funeral. Because it wasn't cheap. It was not cheap. They didn't put him in no cheap casket, like what my parents said about what happened to my great aunt. Like I said, they really went pretty much all out for his funeral. And this is from the best of my memory from what I saw and heard. And not only that, but even during the funeral, because this funeral was, in a like rough city, some gangbangers outside saw some other gangbangers that was attending my cousin's funeral, and they started some mess from the outside, and everybody had to duck down and hide. And I remember falling and hurting myself a little bit. It was like a bad rug burn, trying to get down and trying to hide. It was crazy. My grandmother had to hide behind a curtain. I remember my grandmother telling that this is how she kind of hid, because they thought they was going to shoot up the funeral. It was a mess. It was a disgraceful mess. Couldn't even have a peaceful funeral for their son. And so I remember that's what ended the funeral. And they, hurried his casket out and, got him up out of Dodge, Now, my cousin was not a gangbanger. But I guess some of the kids he knew from school gang banged. I don't know. I just know it was a hot mess. So that's pretty much my story in regards to, a couple of my family members. Some unfortunate things happened to this aunt and uncle, and that was definitely the main thing. And then they ended up not being together anymore. They ended up divorcing. She had left my uncle and, went on about her merry way. And so she ended up passing away from breast cancer some years later after she left my uncle. It was just a really sad situation. But what I'm trying to tell you is you really got to be careful about how you handle your affairs and how you do things, because you could be doing, the Bible says that was done in the dark shall come to the light. Depending on what version you're reading, it says shall come or will come to light, but you get the picture. The bottom line is whatever you're doing in the darkness, it will be exposed. And let me tell you something, that's not, for the lack of better words, that's not the kind of karma you want to reap. Because the Bible also said, that same Bible also says you will reap what you have sown. Now, am I trying to be disrespectful to my aunt and uncle by telling the story? No. No way. I kind of like this uncle, he's a very quiet, nice man. Don't really have any issues with him, and I really don't know him very well. Like, I don't have no close relationship with this uncle. But if they really did what I think they did, which was pretty clear that's what they did, that was really scandalous and dirty and low down. But only they know the story better than I could ever know it. Probably better than my parents could know it. But when I correlate the two, and think back on how the comparison of both of those funerals, yeah, it was a difference of night and day. And I really believe that, let's just put it this way, when you do dirt, you reap dirt. I heard someone say this to me some years ago when we was talking about people doing some things that, like they might have been getting away with it, and it's like, no. When you do dirt, you reap dirt. And so that's pretty much my story. So let me know what you think. Please like, share, subscribe, and thank you. And please come again. Have a great day.